October 3, 1944. The waters off Leyte Gulf, Philippines. Darkness stretches like a living shadow, and the only sound is the gentle slap of waves against a lone vessel. On board, the crew of a small, unassuming boat leans forward, eyes scanning the horizon. Engines hum softly, almost timidly, hiding a storm of intent beneath their modest roar. Then, a flicker on the radar, small, fast, almost a ghost. Someone whispers, "Could be nothing or trouble." In a heartbeat, the quiet is shattered. Explosions tear through the night, fire licking the water, metal screaming. The enemy never saw it coming. Not a battleship. Not a cruiser. Just a wooden craft, barely 12 meters long, powered by raw audacity, and the kind of nerve only desperation can fuel. This was the age of small things doing the impossible. And tonight, the impossible was about to become reality. Long before that night in Leyte Gulf, nobody imagined a boat like this would matter in a world ruled by steel giants. The Pacific was a playground for battleships, floating fortresses with guns the size of trees and armor thick enough to laugh at incoming fire. And yet, war has a strange way of demanding the unexpected. America needed something nimble, something ruthless, something that didn't fight like a battleship, but hunted like a wolf. Engineers in New Orleans and Bayonne were told one thing: build speed, not armor. What emerged from their workshops looked almost ridiculous. A wooden hull. No armor plating. Barely the length of a tennis court. But under that simple frame, 3 engines. 3 monsters. Packard V-12s, roaring like caged storms, unleashing over 4,000 horsepower. Enough to push the boat to speeds destroyers couldn't even dream of. Enough to make the ocean itself split open in white foam. The Navy didn't call it elegant. They didn't even call it safe. But they called it useful. Patrol torpedo boat. A weapon built not to stand its ground, but to strike, disappear, and make the enemy question everything they thought they knew about naval power. Early on, it was chaos. Torpedoes misfired. Crews were untested. And critics mocked the whole project as a wooden joke. But every failure became fuel. Every mistake a lesson. Piece by piece, these small boats were sculpted into predators. And as they evolved, one truth became clear. Speed wasn't just an advantage. Speed was a weapon. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, dominance was measured in size. Bigger guns. Thicker armor. Heavier ships. Their doctrine was a monument to pride, the belief that victory would come from one massive, decisive battle, a clash of titans where steel and fire would decide the fate of the Pacific. So when intelligence reports mentioned America's small torpedo boats, Japanese officers laughed. Wooden mosquitoes, they called them. Annoying. Harmless. Not worth a spot in their war plans. And on paper, they were right. What threat could an 80-foot plywood boat pose to a 2,000-ton destroyer armed with cannons and armor plating? But the ocean keeps secrets. And the Japanese had overlooked the most dangerous one. A small enemy adapts faster than a giant. While destroyers followed rigid doctrine, PT crews rewrote the rules every night. One mission failed. They adjusted. A torpedo missed? They changed their approach. A tactic broke down? They invented a new one by sunrise. Soon, PT boats stopped hunting alone. They moved like wolf packs across black water, using teamwork instead of tonnage. One boat would lure the destroyer's guns. Another would circle wide, silent and unseen, lining up the perfect torpedo shot. A third would be ready to race in, guns blazing, to cover the other's escape. Piece by piece, the mosquitoes became more than a nuisance. They became a threat no captain could ignore. Because out there, on moonless nights where even shadows fled the sky, the Japanese destroyers weren't the hunters anymore. They were prey. October 6, 1943. A night so black the sea and sky were indistinguishable, one endless void swallowing every shape, every sound. This was Iron Bottom Sound, a graveyard where ships didn't sink. They disappeared. For American PT boats drifted just above idle, PT-59, PT-157, PT-162, and PT-170. No lights. No chatter. Only the soft tick of engines cooling and the steady thump of adrenaline in their ears. Their mission was simple in words, deadly in practice. Intercept the Tokyo Express. Japan's high-speed destroyer convoys were the last lifeline keeping their isolated island troops alive. Minutes after midnight, a faint echo ghosted across the radar. Then another. Then three more. Destroyers. Fast. Heavy. Closing in. Every man on those PT boats knew what came next. Searchlights brighter than the sun. 5-inch shells screaming through the dark. Water erupting like geysers around them. But that night, something was different. They didn't run. They attacked. PT-170 surged forward first, throttle wide open, its bow slapping the black waves as it charged toward steel giants. At barely 1,000 yards, suicide range, its torpedo tubes hissed. Moments later, PT-162 let loose its own spread. The ocean held its breath. Then, a flash so bright it carved shadows into the sky. A roar that cracked across the strait. The Japanese destroyer Yujiri, nearly 3,000 tons of imperial steel, lifted out of the water, split open like a ruptured shell, and disappeared into the depths. 26 minutes. That's all it took for an 80-foot wooden boat to do the impossible. For the first time in naval history, a plywood boat had destroyed a fully armed destroyer in open combat. That wasn't just a victory. It was a message. A warning. A prophecy of what the Pacific War was becoming. After the explosion, after the flames, after the destroyer slipped beneath the surface like a dying star, the world went quiet again. PT-345 drifted in the darkness, her engines low, her crew breathless. No one spoke at first. The only sound was the ticking of cooling metal and the distant crackle of burning oil. Then someone whispered the truth they were all afraid to say out loud. "We actually did it!" This wasn't luck. This wasn't a miracle. This was proof, solid, smoking proof, that a small, fast, underestimated force could outthink and outrun the giants of the Pacific. Behind them, the horizon burned orange where the destroyer had vanished. Ahead of them, endless black water waited, hiding more ships, more dangers, more nights that could be their last. But something had changed. Before tonight, they hoped PT boats mattered. Now they knew. The Japanese would never again call them mosquitoes, with a laugh. From this moment forward, every destroyer captain in the Pacific would think twice before charging into the dark at full speed. Because out here, in the place where moonlight dies, even a plywood boat can become a weapon of legend. Decades have passed since that night. The ocean has swallowed the wrecks, the gunfire, the smoke. But the lesson? The lesson survived. PT boats weren't built to win a war by themselves. They weren't the biggest, they weren't the strongest, and they definitely weren't the safest. But they proved something every modern navy, every soldier, every leader still remembers. 1. Speed plus intelligence size. A massive destroyer could throw out walls of fire. A PT boat could slip right between them. Agility beat armor. Brain beat brawn. Today's drone warfare? Guided missiles? Small units striking big targets? It all traces back to stories like this. When tiny wooden boats rewrote the rules. 2. When you're underestimated, you're dangerous. Japan never fixed its blind spot. They kept planning for big battles, while small PT crews kept inventing new ways to win. Being underestimated became a weapon. 3. Legends are born in the dark. Most people never heard the names of these crews. No medals on magazine covers. No Hollywood movies. But out there on black water, they changed history. One torpedo at a time. One impossible escape after another. That's their legacy. Not the boats themselves, but the idea that courage plus creativity can flip the odds of an entire war. The Pacific War was filled with giants, battleships the size of cities, carriers that launched storms of metal into the sky. But history isn't written by giants alone. Sometimes, it's written by the men in plywood boats, racing across black water with nothing but a torpedo, a prayer, and the courage to try the impossible. Tonight's story wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about possibility. About how the smallest force in the fight can change the way a superpower thinks. About how a handful of determined men forced the enemy to rewrite their plans, their tactics, their fears. PT boats didn't win the war, but they changed it. And the ocean still remembers their roar. The next time you hear about some giant power, some unstoppable force, some enemy too big to challenge, remember this. On a moonless night in 1943, an 80-foot plywood boat proved the world wrong. And that's why we tell these stories. Because legends aren't massive. They're made massive by the bravery of the people who live them.